where we're going to be going on a journey through our gastrointestinal tract. And most people are very surprised when we go on our journey through our gastrointestinal tract about where different foods are digested. And the old Proverbs 14 verse 6 says, knowledge is easy to him that understands. When you understand how your gastrointestinal tract works, then you automatically have the knowledge on how to treat it. And you can eat very nice food. We had a very nice lunch today. But if you're not digesting it, you're not going to get the nutrients out of that food. Our gastrointestinal tract is about 8 meters long. A dog's gastrointestinal tract is 1 meter long. So our gastrointestinal is about 8 meters long. And as you can see from here on the board, a lot of that room is taken up in the small intestine. Anything that goes into the gastrointestinal tract is not part of you or me until it gets broken down into tiny little substances. Then it's absorbed into the blood. Then it becomes part of you and me. So let's begin. We're going to begin with the mouth. So the first organ we're looking at is the mouth. And the pH in the mouth is an alkaline environment. The mouth is the only place in the body where we've got exposed bone. And that exposed bone, of course, is teeth. And teeth play a very important role in digestion. We should chew our food until it's almost a liquid, because there's no teeth in the stomach. That's the only part that we can chew our food up into tiny little particles. And we've got such a fast society today, most people don't chew enough. Most people chew, swallow, chew, swallow. Well, that makes it very difficult for the digestion, because those lumps that aren't chewed properly, guess what? They're just going to come out the other end. There are two digestions that begin in the mouth, and most people don't realize that some digestion does happen in the mouth. So chewing is important for a few reasons: to break down the food into tiny particles, and also to give the brain enough time to assess what is in what you're eating, so that it can alert the other organs of digestion further down. So one food that is digested, begins digestion in the mouth, is starch. So starch would be things like, well, all your grains are considered starch, and also potatoes, there's starch. But there's no enzyme in the mouth to break down the starch until the molars are through. So when we're babies, we get 4 teeth at the bottom, 4 teeth at the top, and they're called milk teeth. And you know why they're called milk teeth? Because that should be baby's main food, is milk. Unfortunately, mothers are told today that they have to start giving their baby solid food at 6 months. At 6 months, a baby can't sit. And at 6 months, a baby has no teeth. So it defies reason. It defies reason to give a baby food when they can't sit. Well, at 6 months, they're starting to put things in their mouth, but you notice they'll put anything in their mouth. But it defies reason to give a baby food if there are no teeth. And even when the first teeth appear, they usually start about 7.5 months. And usually a baby can sit about 7.5 months. But even those first 4 teeth, they're milk teeth. That should be the main food that baby has. But this is also taste time. It's a good time for baby to suck on a bit of cucumber, suck on an apple or a pear. So little by little, you're starting to introduce. But baby's main food is milk. Now, some mothers have said to me, Barbara, I've got to give my baby food at 6 months. Has your baby got any teeth? No. Can your baby sit? Not quite. See, it defies reason. I said, why do you have to give your baby food? And they say, well, the nurse says I must because breast milk hasn't got enough iron in it. Breast milk is quite high in iron in the first 6 months, but in the second 6 months, it comes down a lot lower. And my response to that is, did God make a mistake? No, of course, God never makes a mistake. The baby's requirements for iron are bigger in the first 6 months than the second 6 months. And I was looking at one study where they gave all the babies in this study equivalent iron, meaning equivalent to the first 6 months, and all the babies got diarrhea. No, God never made a mistake. He cannot make a mistake. The milk is perfect at every single age. And so from maybe 8 months on, just a little bit of taste food. When the baby's anywhere from 14 to 22 months of age, then the molars come through. They're the back teeth, they're the grinders. We grind grain. And when the molars come through, then the mouth releases a salivary amylase called ptyalin. Ptyalin is the enzyme that breaks down starch. This is incredibly important information because when babies are fed food too young, when babies are fed starch before the ptyalin is released, they're not able to break it down properly. And so malabsorption syndrome can be set up in the gut. I've just had a lady emailing me. She said, my baby is 13 months old. My baby is not interested in food. I'm getting so much pressure. My baby hasn't put on a lot of weight. I said, send me a photo of your baby. And here's this gorgeous baby with rolls here, a nice little chubby arm with a lovely smile. I said, you have a beautiful baby and your baby is certainly not underweight. I said, did you know that 100 years ago, babies were not fed food? A couple of 100 years ago, not fed food. Do you know what that means? Galileo, Mozart, Bach, Einstein. They didn't get food till they were 2 or 3 years of age. Geniuses. Very important point, because a lot of people have gut problems today because they were fed starch too young as babies. The other food that is broken down in the stomach or starts its breakdown is saturated fat. So where do we get saturated fat? Saturated fat would be coconut. Saturated fat is cocoa butter. There's a bit of saturated fat in the rich nuts like macadamia, a little bit in avocado, butter. They're all your saturated fats. That's the only fat that's broken down in the mouth. Underneath the tongue, there's a gland called the sublingual gland, and it releases lingual lipase. And lingual lipase is the enzyme that breaks down saturated fat. So coconut oil is unique in that the breakdown begins in the mouth. We come down the esophagus and we come to a little valve here. It's a little double-layered valve. It's called the cardiac sphincter. And the reason it's called the cardiac sphincter is because of its closeness to the heart muscle. And every nurse that works in emergency, she will tell you people come in thinking they're having a heart attack and that's actually indigestion or heartburn. You've heard of heartburn or reflux. It's when the food comes up. You see, when we get into the stomach, it is no longer an alkaline environment. In the stomach, it's an acid environment. In fact, it's the only part of the body that is acid or should be acid. And as you'll see, acid is necessary for the enzymes to break down protein. So why would someone have reflux or heartburn? And if someone has reflux or heartburn, they're given antacids. So what's going to break down the protein now if they have antacids. You see, the problem's not the acid, the problem's the little valve. So why would the little valve be weak? Because God made a good valve there, double layered, to stop acid going back up. We had a guest whose whole esophagus was ulcerated because so much acid had been coming up for so long. Whew. So what's wrong with the valve? Why would the valve be weak? Well, in Australia, many people eat breakfast like a pauper, lunch like a pauper, and the tea is king and the queen together. They just nibble all day long. Then by the end of the day, they're starving, eat a huge meal, then they lie down. And what does gravity do? It actually starts pushing against this cardiac sphincter, weakening it. Now, this cardiac sphincter is a muscle, and when it's relaxed, it's closed. And when it tightens, it opens. So if someone's stressed, anxious, upset, their muscles tighten, and that can also open it. So at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, any guest that comes with reflux, well, we serve breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and we only serve a thin soup at night. And we give them magnesium. Magnesium is your ultimate muscle relaxant. So remember, when that's relaxed, it's closed. So the majority of people that come to Misty Mountain with reflux go home without it. One other point is that little muscle there is right in the middle of our diaphragm. You know, our diaphragm is the muscle that goes like this. And if the muscles, the abdominal muscles are weak, then the cardiac sphincter is going to be weak. And so an important part of strengthening the cardiac sphincter is to strengthen the core muscles. When the core muscles are strong, the cardiac sphincter will be stronger. So now let's go into the stomach. It's an acid environment, and the lining of the stomach has folds like this. And those folds are all lined with glands. And 2/3 of these glands, 2/3 release mucus. And what that does is that causes a thick mucosa wall to cover the lining of the stomach, because down in these, so that's 2/3 are releasing mucus. So cayenne pepper and a little bit of water just before the meal. That can also boost hydrochloric acid. So now we're coming through the bottom valve in the stomach. It's called the pyloric sphincter. And the pyloric sphincter is open when we wake up in the morning. That's why drinking warm water in the morning, great way to get water all through the body. If you drink very cold water, that will shut, and the stomach has to warm the water up before it can go anywhere else in the body. Pyloric sphincter is an interesting sphincter because it will only open if it senses that the food are broken down to a certain state. So when it senses that the food is broken down to a certain state, it'll start opening. And there's much research to show that digestion takes 3 to 4.5 hours. And then the stomach loves a rest of about 1 to 2 hours. So with that in the equation, we should be leaving 5 to 6 hours between meals. You've heard of the intermittent fasting, 5-2 diets, probably the most popular eating at the moment. Well, they've given it another name now, time-restricted eating, which is eating twice in a 24-hour period, 6 hours apart. And the research on that, it's saying diabetes, helping weight loss, helping so many areas. And yet this is totally different to what we've been told in the last, 40 years. Graze, eat all day long. Grazing or eating all day long really disrupts stomach function. It's like having a job to do. I was talking to Michael one day and he said, I had a 2-hour job to do a day, but he said, I kept getting phone calls. Someone kept coming into the office, and that 2-hour job ended up taking about 6 hours. That's stomach. When we keep putting more food in, digestion that would take maybe 4.5 hours can take 8 hours. So it's important that when you put the food in, just leave it. A man said to me at a health retreat it was in Denver. I came into the kitchen after we served breakfast to the guests, and he said, "You're wrong." I said, "Oh, where am I wrong?" He said, "Guests should be having fruit, then they should be waiting half an hour and have the rest of breakfast." Have you heard that theory? I said, that defies reason, because after half an hour, the fruit's still in the breakfast, it's still in the stomach. So I don't know where that theory came from, but whoever made that theory up does not understand digestion. You see, everything that goes into the stomach gets all mixed up. And I don't know about you, but I want to sit down and eat my meal, and then I've got things to do. But to eat a little bit and then come back after half an hour, it defies reason, and it defies the basic anatomy of the human body. Probably the only food that might get through digestion in an hour would be just watermelon. But you'd have to have no seeds, because if there's seeds there, digestion will try and work on those seeds. So you can do a lot to help your digestion by giving a break between meals. What about children? This is the way I raised my children. And it wasn't long before I came to the conclusion that children say they're hungry when they're bored. And sometimes they say they're hungry when actually they're thirsty. So just make sure they drink and divert. But it's important to eat high fiber. So all your plant foods are high in fiber. The only time plant foods are not high in fiber is when they're refined. What fiber does, it slowly releases the glucose. Generous amounts of protein. So where do we get our protein from? We get our protein from legumes. That's your lentils, chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans. The falafel we had for lunch is chickpeas. And I also know that when you make falafels, you also put tahini, so that's from the sesame seed. So seeds. And the other great form of protein is the nuts. And I find that many vegetarians are protein deficient. Some vegetarians I talk to, they might have legumes once a week. They have seeds now and then, might have nuts every now and then. I have nuts every meal, and that's not hard to do with them. Nuts are delicious, but try and keep it to 8 to 10 and chew them very well, because if you don't chew them very well, the little bit that you didn't chew very well will come out the other end, and you won't be able to access the nutrients in that little lump. And healthy fats. What are the healthy fats? A healthy fat is a fat that hasn't been altered. So again, there's your nuts and your seeds, your coconuts, your avocados, and the two fats that are extracted from the flesh of the plant. So they've been eaten for thousands and thousands of years is coconut, because it's extracted from the flesh of the plant, and olive oil, because it's extracted from the flesh of the plant. So women could virtually extract their own oils in their kitchens. So the healthy fats, the healthiest free fats would be your coconut and your olive. These are the three foods that keep the food in the stomach longer. Protein keeps the food in the stomach longer because it's in the stomach that protein begins its breakdown. Fats keep the food in the stomach longer because it coats the food and it takes a little longer to break down. And that's good news, because we want to leave 5 to 6 hours between meals. And these protein and fats that give the feeling of satiation, which is satisfaction, the feeling of, I've eaten well. If you just eat a salad, you don't get that feeling of satisfaction. So these are the three food groups that will keep the food in the stomach longer. So now we're moving out of the stomach and into the small intestine. And in the small intestine, we've got a few things happening here. Notice underneath the liver, we've got the gallbladder. The liver makes bile, and bile is what emulsifies or breaks down your polyunsaturated fats. So duodenum is the first part of the small intestine. Duodenum. So now we're going to have a look at the different things that happen there. So the liver makes bile, and the gallbladder is a reservoir for that bile. So if someone's had their gallbladder taken out, their liver's still making bile. They just haven't got their reservoir there anymore. And also, when we get into the duodenum, it's now an alkaline environment. And what helps this environment to be alkaline is that the pancreas, it releases sodium bicarbonate, and that helps to quickly alkalize that environment. So the liver releases bile, and bile is the enzyme that breaks down your polyunsaturated fats. Because your saturated fat, as we looked at, its breakdown begins in the mouth. What you've also got in the small intestine is the pancreas. And the pancreas releases a few enzymes. So let's have a look at what the pancreas does. So remember, the pancreas releases sodium bicarbonate, which helps it to be an alkaline environment. The pancreas releases pancreatic lipase. And pancreatic lipase is an enzyme that finalizes polyunsaturated fat digestion. So the bile emulsifies it, and the pancreatic lipase further breaks it down, ready for absorption out of the gut. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Now remember, in the mouth, the salivary amylase was ptyalin, and it started starch digestion. And when that partially broken down starch gets into the acid stomach, its digestion is put on hold. And then it comes down into the duodenum with an alkaline environment and the release of pancreatic amylase. Starch digestion is finalized. The pancreas also releases, two enzymes, very similar. In fact, I didn't do stomach, did I? So what the stomach releases is pepsin, and pepsin is the enzyme that breaks down protein. So protein digestion begins in the stomach, and it further is broken down in the duodenum by enzymes from the pancreas. So we've got chymo. Chymo is an enzyme that breaks down protein. Can you see what the main part of digestion is? It's not the stomach. It's the pancreas. And if you'll notice, anyone who has pancreatic cancer or pancreatitis, they usually die very quickly. And what they die from is malnutrition, because it's the pancreas that finalizes fat digestion, starch digestion, and protein digestion. Chymotrypsin. So if someone has pancreatic cancer or pancreatitis, it's important that they go on digestive enzymes. So a digestive enzyme to break down protein is proteolytic. So proteolytic enzyme is the enzyme that breaks down protein. So proteolytic enzyme is pepsin, and a proteolytic enzyme is the chymotrypsin. But God, in his goodness and his mercy, has put some proteolytic enzymes in some foods. So the core of the pineapple contains bromelain, and bromelain is a proteolytic enzyme. Also, in the seed of the pawpaw or the papaya, it's called papain. Papain is an enzyme found in the seeds of the pawpaw or papaya. Is a proteolytic enzymes. Now, we never use black pepper because black pepper is an irritant to the lining of the gut. But what one can use is that they can get the pawpaw seeds, they can dry them, put them in the pepper container, and it looks just like peppercorns, and it has a bite to it just like pepper, and no one will know that they're grinding papaya seeds instead of black pepper on their food. A digestive aid too. Most of our food is designed to be absorbed probably halfway down the small intestine. And so now we're coming to the grand finale of digestion. The grand finale of digestion is the part where our nutrients from our food are now absorbed into the blood. So these are the villi that line the small intestine. So if we were to put the lining of our small intestine under a microscope, you would see these little villi. Now, up the middle of the villi is a lacteal. That's part of the lymphatic system. And all through the villi is your blood capillary network. And remember, the life of the flesh is in the blood. But to get the nutrients out of the gut and into the blood is quite a process. That's why I call it the grand finale. Lining the villi of the gastrointestinal tract, there's a thick turf wall. And that thick turf wall covers the lining of the gut. And it's made up of Lactobacillus acidophilus, bifidus bacterium, or often called the healthy or the friendly bacteria. Now, when we were in our mother's womb, we had no bacteria in our gut. But when we were born, we were literally showered with our mother's microorganisms. And breast milk doesn't come in for 3 days, but the first 3 days, there's a thick yellow creamy substance called colostrum, and it's very rich in the Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacteriums. And this gut flora is essential for the establishment of our immune system. That's why it's important for a mother not to have antibiotics in pregnancy, because the antibiotics kill off the good flora. And if part of her good flora in the gut is killed off, then she doesn't have a good supply to give to her new baby. It also explains why children born via cesarean section are often more prone to allergies, because they don't get the good gut flora, which the baby born vaginally does. That's why for babies born via cesarean, it's very important they be breastfed, because they will get some there, but also the mother should paint her nipple with a little probiotic powder before the morning feed to ensure that baby's getting good gut flora. So this flora that lines the gut, it's very simple, or very similar, I should say, to that microorganisms that are in the soil. Remember we looked at the microorganisms in the soil this morning? And these microorganisms are responsible for the final breakdown. Well, what do I mean by final breakdown? Because surely the breakdown is happening with all of these enzymes. That's true. But with this breakdown, there's a release of B vitamins. Interesting to note that in the creation of sauerkraut, the breaking down of the cabbage, it releases B vitamins. And also the lactobacillus acidophilus is made, similar process. This gut flora is also responsible for the absorption of our nutrients out of the gut and into the blood. This gut flora is very important for protection, to protect the blood from any harmful pathogens that might be in the gut. And this gut flora also nourishes. It nourishes the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. And have a look at this. So here's the roots of a tree, which we looked at before lunch. And here is the lining of our gastrointestinal tract, very similar. So the microbes in the soil are doing this to get the nutrients out of the soil and into the roots of the plant. And the gut flora in the gut is doing a similar thing, getting the nutrients out of the gut and into the blood. Hippocrates said all disease begins in the gut. Very important to know how the gut works and give it the right conditions. And you'll find nearly every country in the world traditionally had a cultured food as part of their food. It might be sauerkraut, it might be yogurt, it might be kefir, sourdough bread. If it's from Japan, miso. These cultured foods create lactobacillus acidophilus. And so eating cultured foods helps to strengthen the good flora in the gastrointestinal tract. Have you heard of leaky gut? What's leaky gut? Have you ever wondered? It's a leak. What's the leak? Well, there are several things that break down this thick turf wall, and now you've got leaks. So antibiotics, they're very effective, and all your statin drugs can do it. Your pain-killing medication, people are being on that long term. Refined sugar feeds the candida yeast. Everyone's got candida yeast in their guts, but lactobacillus acidophilus keeps the candida under control. But when lactobacillus acidophilus is killed off from the drugs, the antibiotics, then the candida can get out of control. And so refined sugar coming in the diet, it just feeds it. So can you see what's happening now? We've now got a compromise in the breakdown of our food. We've got a compromise in the absorption of our nutrients. We've lost our protection. And also we've compromised the nourishment that should nourish the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. So how can we build that up again? If someone's been on antibiotics, I highly recommend they go on a probiotic supplement 3/4 of an hour before breakfast for at least 4 or 5 months. One writer said that taking an antibiotic is like dropping an atomic bomb in the gut. What did the atomic bomb do? It killed the good and the bad alike. So that's the grand finale. Few things to notice. Lining the gut are little receptor sites for glucose. And there's a carrier in there that will take the glucose through and into the blood. But the carrier will not accept the glucose unless it comes with a molecule of sodium. And that's why it's so important to have salt on your food. Because if you're not having salt in your diet, not all your glucose will get through because the carrier will not accept the glucose unless sodium comes in. Also, with the polyunsaturated fats, they don't go into the blood, they go into the lacteal. And then that's taken up to the thymus and then to the liver. Whereas your saturated fats, which are broken down with lingual lipase under the tongue, they're taken straight into the blood, straight to the liver and burnt as fuel. So your saturated fats are an excellent form of fuel for the cells. There's been a bad rap on saturated fat, and it's unjustified because the saturated fat does not cause heart disease. There is no proof that it causes heart disease. Just go to the South Pacific Islands. They've been having coconut oil for centuries, thousands of years. And when Captain Cook landed on those islands, there was no strokes or heart attacks. And yet they were eating coconut 3 times a day. They're having a lot of heart attacks now because they've stopped the coconut and they're eating the 5 lethal whites: white rice, white flour, white sugar, white refined salt, and white cow's milk. And they're doing their work, causing damage to the arterial walls, which is one of the main causes of heart disease. So we're moving on now, and we're coming down to the last part of the small intestine, because most of our nutrients should already have been absorbed. So all we've got left is the insoluble cellulose, which fruit and vegetables are very high in. And when it's called chyme, when the chyme gets through into the large intestine, there's a little double-layered valve there called the ileocecal valve. And this double-layered valve is so that nothing from here will go back into there. And notice underneath there's the appendix. And the appendix is a very important part of digestion. The appendix has 2 main roles. One role is that it is called the colon's oil can. So it lubricates the contents as it's coming into the large intestine, and it also releases antibacterial fluid. Why would it release antibacterial fluid? Well, if what's coming out of here is toxic, what would be toxic? Well, dogs can get away with eating meat because their gastrointestinal tract is only 6 foot long. And by the way, dogs have 10 times the hydrochloric acid of humans. Well, have you seen what dogs eat? Some dogs eat rotten things. And notice they don't die because their hydrochloric acid is so strong. And the hydrochloric acid has a few properties. It's antibacterial, antifungal. So the gastrointestinal tract, being 8 meters long, by the time the meat is coming down here, it's putrefying. So when people are on a high meat diet, what's coming out of here, it's pretty bad. See, dogs only 1 meter long, their gut, 10 times the hydrochloric acid. So that meat is very well broken down and it's out. But I don't know anyone that likes gathering up droppings from dogs and putting that in their compost bin. No, in my compost bin, I only want droppings from the cows and the goats and the horses, the vegetarian animals. See, when vegetables break down, they ferment, whereas when meat breaks down, it putrefies, and that's quite toxic. So the only way a person can really get away with eating meat is if they eat a lot of vegetables with it. So they've got the fermentation from the vegetable, which calms it down. But I'm just giving a scenario of what might be coming out of here quite toxic. So meat, quite toxic. If that person's having a lot of sugar, alcohol, refined foods that break down as quickly as sugar, that combination will come out of here quite toxic. So the pancreas has to work hard to release antibacterial fluid to sort of calm that down before it gets out of the body. Most people that suffer from appendicitis, it's because of an overworked pancreas. It just gets overworked and then it inflames. We know this guy who was recently married, and he just let his hair down for the wedding. He's in his 60s. He doesn't usually eat so much meat. He had lots of meat, lots of alcohol, lots of sweet cakes and ice cream. He was in hospital that night with pancreatitis. And his pancreas almost burst. Just poor pancreas was just overdoing it. Sorry, appendix. It's the appendix. Pancreas is up there, appendix. So what's the main role of the large intestine? The main role of the large intestine is to take water out so that stools are formed. Because as the chyme comes from the small intestine into the large, it's basically liquid. And so the water's taken out. Now, if a person is dehydrated, then what's going to be happening is more water is taken out than should be taken out. And so we're left with rabbit pellets and cement. It's important to keep well hydrated to keep the stool soft. What's also happening in the colon or the large intestine is the fiber is sweeping. You see the corners here? And unfortunately, when a person's on a very refined diet, eating a lot of meat and dairy products, there is no fiber in meat. There is no fiber in the refined flours, that things can get stuck. Things can get stuck, especially in these corners here. Things can get stuck. And when they get stuck and there's no more fiber to sweep it through, they can start to rot. In fact, the countries in this world that are the highest meters have the highest incidence of colon cancer. So we're moving on through, and on a plant-based diet, we've got a lot of nice fiber to bring it all through. And then notice in the last part of the colon, I've drawn it in red. There's a little muscle, and that muscle, it's almost like a little clasp, and it holds up the last part of the colon. And we're very glad, because if we feel we have to go, and when you feel that you've got bowel movement, it's because here has filled up. But let's say the plane's about to land. Let's say there's a crisis and you just can't go, or you're in the car and you can't find a toilet anyway. We're very glad for that muscle which holds it back. It's called puborectalis, is that muscle. Now, this is the throne. Let me show you what happens. So here's a person sitting on their throne doing the morning evacuation. And when a person sits, puborectalis is still caught up tight. But if a person sits on the throne and they get a little stool and put it in the front, so that when they sit, they're mimicking the squatting position, puborectalis opens. And when puborectalis opens, then the colon basically opens right up, and the contents can be passed with much greater ease. Also, squatting, or having your feet on a stool to mimic a squatting position, it takes all pressure off the anus. Now, if someone's dehydrated, they're eating a diet that's got not much fiber in it, and they're getting a little bit constipated, And so they sit on the throne and they decide to help things along a bit and strain. That puts a huge amount of pressure here. And that's when hemorrhoids can appear. And hemorrhoids are not very comfortable. When I was working in the operating theatre, we did a few hemorrhoidectomies, and all they do is put a stitch or a, it's like fishing line around here, and then just cut them. And I just think, oh, how will that person feel when they wake up? Nothing compared to what they'll feel when they do their first bowel motion. Oof. So let's do all we can to prevent that. And if someone does have hemorrhoids, the way to heal it is to squat, so there's no pressure on there. Make sure they're drinking a lot of water. Make sure that they're eating a plant-based diet and prevent constipation. That there's some of the easiest ways to prevent hemorrhoids. You can even buy a stool now that wraps around the toilet. I know in Australia we have a shop called Bed Bath and Beyond, and you can buy something called Squatty Potty, and it's a stool that just wraps around the toilet. What can you do if someone is drinking adequate water, is exercising? Because when you exercise, your colon's getting strengthened and moving, and they're eating a plant-based diet, but they're still constipated. Dr. Kellogg, very famous doctor that wrote many books on health and many books on digestion, he said 3 intakes of food a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. He said, if you eat 3 meals a day and go once, you are constipated. But I know in America, it's not. They did a survey on how many times people are going to the toilet, and it was something like once every 3 or 4 days. Now that's the conditions that can create the colon or the colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer, that's cancer down in this area. That's about the number 2 killer in America today. This is in a society that have a lot of coffee, a lot of tea, a lot of soda pops, a lot of sugar, a lot of refined foods. And there is a result. So what can you do if someone started to do everything right and they're still not going? Prune juice is good, cup of prune juice. Or you're familiar with chia seeds? Chia seeds take up to about 25 times their own weight in liquid. And if you put, I think it's something like 1/4 cup of chia seed to a cup of water and stir it. Within about 10-15 minutes, it goes like a soft gel. Drink that. And that lovely soft gel can really move things through. Psyllium husks, they can play a role, but at Misty Mountain, we serve a tea, and it's 1 part licorice and 1 part, no, it's not, it's, I haven't been at Misty Mountain for 6 months, I've got to get this right. 1 part cascara. Cascara sagrada. Cascara is a herb well known to stimulate peristalsis. 2 part licorice. And licorice is a herb that has a sweet taste, but it's also high in emollient or lubricant. So it's good to coat and soothe. And 3 part buckthorn. Buckthorn is a relative to cascara, but it's not as strong. And cascara and buckthorn are barks, and licorice is a root. So once those dried herbs are mixed in a jar, the recipe is 1 teaspoon of the herb mix to 1 cup of water. And then that has a gentle simmer, because whenever you're using barks or roots, there must be a gentle simmer, and that gentle simmer probably about 10 minutes. And the dose is usually what our guests take is 1 cup just before they go to bed. And then usually in the morning, they go as usual. We give it to our guests on the fasting days. Most Tuesday are fasting days, because often when you stop solid food, the colon can stop. And the colon being an organ of elimination, we don't want it to stop. So we find that tea is very helpful in helping to move things through the colon. What those herbs do is they gently stimulate peristalsis. Well, what can you do if the person is going too much? So when a person has chronic diarrhea, it's usually given the name, can be gastritis, Crohn's disease, colitis, irritable bowel syndrome. They're all very similar. They basically are referring to inflammation in the gastrointestinal tract. And the different names can just apply to different parts of the gastrointestinal tract. But the same conditions will heal them all. And we've seen people totally heal. So there are some foods that must stop. And we find these foods are very irritating to the lining of the gastrointestinal tract if it's inflamed. If it's not inflamed, these don't necessarily inflame it. Wheat, the wheat of today's been hybridized. Oats are high in a plant chemical called lectins, and lectins can really feed inflammation. Dairy, cow's milk's excellent milk for baby cows, not the best for humans. And refined sugar really just, as I said, they're like kerosene to a fire. And refined sugar. So we talked about them earlier for other conditions called the five most common allergens. And the herbs, God in his wisdom and his mercy, he gave us herbs that coat, soothe, and heal the lining of the gut. One is slippery elm, and slippery elm is the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree. And to make slippery elm, you take a teaspoon and you put it in a cup of hot water and you mix it. Mix it quickly so it doesn't go lumpy, and then drink it down. And it'll go quite thick, but that's what you want, because that thick, almost glutinous-y, coats, soothes and heals. So here it can help to soothe the stomach ulcer. The lady with the ulcerated esophagus I mentioned earlier, we gave her that every night. Slippery elm coats, soothes and heals. Anywhere it touches, it coats, soothes and heals the whole lining of the gastrointestinal tract. If someone's got diarrhea and they're going 10 times a day, they're very inflamed gut. They can take this every hour or every 2 hours. And it'll also put a little bit of form when the diarrhea is very liquid. So let me tell you a story to illustrate. We had a man come, and he was from Kenya. He was about 40. He was living in Australia, and he had severe irritable bowel syndrome. He was on anti-inflammatory medication, and he was also on cortisone, prednisone. And he just about lived on these foods. He didn't realize that these foods were irritating the lining of his gut. He was very private, and the first 2 days at Misty Mountain is just juices. And I thought, I wonder how he'll go on just juices. But we gave him the slippery elm 4 times a day. We gave it to him in the morning, middle of the day, late afternoon, and just before he went to bed. So guests come in Sunday. So on Tuesday, I saw him and I said, "How's things?" And all he'd ever say was, "Good." I'd say, "How many times?" He'd say, "4." Now that was very good, because he was going 10 times. So by Tuesday, he's going 4 times a day. I was able to talk to him a little bit more on Wednesday because he was so happy. He said, "I'm not bleeding from the colon anymore." He said that cramps I was getting have stopped. And I said, "Well, I believe you could stop your anti-inflammatories now." I said, don't stop the cortisone, we have to go off that one very slowly. But the fact that you don't have cramping, the fact that you are now going 4 times and there's a little bit of form, that's even on juices. I said, that tells me that your inflammation is slowing down. He stopped his anti-inflammatories and there was no reaction. Now, if he stopped his anti-inflammatories and he started going 10 times a day, what will we do? Well, we got a choice. We can put him back on the anti-inflammatories, or we can go to 1 hourly slippery elm. If it was me, I would go the 1 hourly slippery elm, but there was no reaction. Now, he was on 15 milligrams of cortisone a day. I said to him by Sunday, I said, I think you could go down to 10. You have to go down very slowly on the cortisone, because all his symptoms told us that the inflammation had settled right down. And how did it tell us that? No more bleeding, no more cramping, no more violent diarrhea. See, there's body signs that will tell you. Yes? Well, it depends. If the person's going 10 times a day, you could do it hourly. So you play with that. See what you're you're watching response. You're watching response. But I think we were giving it to him 4 times a day, and that slowed everything right down. So that was enough. So what he can continue to do is keep this out of his diet. So instead of peanuts, he can have cashews, he can have almonds. There's so many nuts. Instead of wheat, he could have spelt, sourdough. Instead of oats, he could have millet porridge or rice. Rice is a very safe grain. Instead of dairy, he can have coconut or organic soy or almond milk. Instead of refined sugar, he can have honey or maple syrup. See, there's plenty of alternatives. It's not hard. Buckwheat, yeah. So he went home a very, very happy man. Oat milk, probably leave it, because as I said, the oats are high in lectins. Now, my 3 sons love having oats for breakfast every day, and they have oats for breakfast every single morning, but they have no health problems. But if they had irritable bowel, or if they had a health problem, that is something that would have to ease off. They are high in lectins, but if you have good, strong gut flora, it disarms the lectins. So obviously they've got good gut flora. That's why you're the doctor. If it works, do it. If it doesn't work, keep adjusting until it does work. So we've seen many totally conquer irritable bowel, totally conquer Crohn's disease, colitis. That's the good news. Now, it sounds like a fairly strict diet, but it's not forever. It's just until you heal. Maybe when you totally heal, there's no diarrhea, stomach's happy. You could try a bit of wheat bread, maybe a slice. In fact, one young man, he was having a slice, and I knew that he had allergies. I said, you can eat wheat. He said, today, but not tomorrow, not the next day, and the not next day. He said, I can have 1 slice once a week. He was only 19 and he'd got to know exactly what he could do. You see, our body will tell us. It'll go, I like it, or it'll say, no, don't do that again. Listen to it. It's important to listen. In fact, the verse I mentioned yesterday, Exodus 15:26, says, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God and do that which is right in his sight, diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God in your body. Listen. If it works, do it. If it doesn't work, adjust till it does work. And so ends our journey through the gastrointestinal tract. I trust you've learnt a little bit more about your body and how it breaks down food. We're going to have a break now. So it is 25 to 4. If we could come back in 10 minutes, that will be 10 to 4. We're going to look at sweet sleep. And you'll be surprised at all the things that happen in the night while we sleep. Something many people don't experience today, isn't that right? And it's got to do with a few things. And that's what I'd like to cover this afternoon. In the base of our brain, there's a little gland called the pineal gland. And the pineal gland releases 4 hormones every night. But it releases them only at certain times. So I think you have daylight saving, yeah? Yeah. So in daylight saving time, it's between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. So we'll say that that's summertime. And in winter time, it's between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. No, that's not right. 2 a.m. and in the summertime, that's the 3. So that's winter time. Only in those hours. It has a lot to do with the moon, the tides. Light and dark signals are fed through the optic nerve to a control center in the brain where our body clock is located. And our body clock communicates with the pineal gland to cause a release of these hormones. So one hormone is serotonin, that's your mood hormone. So if you want to feel good, make sure you go to bed early. Another hormone is arginine vasotocin. And arginine vasotocin is a hormone that puts us into a deep sleep. And it's also our natural painkiller. So if you have pain of any sort, make sure you go to bed early so that you're getting a dose of your arginine vasotocin, your natural painkiller. But as you use your arginine vasotocin, there's a waste given off. And if that waste isn't released, then the next night you won't get a release of your arginine vasotocin. So how can we get rid of the waste? That's where exercise is important. And Ecclesiastes says the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, because that physical exercise releases much waste out of the body, and particularly we're talking about the arginine vasotocin. The other hormone is epithalamin, and epithalamin increases learning capacity. God designed our brain to get smarter and wiser with age. That's why when I was banned in America in 2019, my husband said to me, "You've got a choice. You can go overseas and lecture, or you can retire." And I said, "I think it'd be silly to retire now, because I've never had so much information and so much experience in my brain." But I think most people my age have well retired by now. And that's why I believe it is our responsibility to keep our body working well so that we can continue to work for God. I think it's a pity that most people retire sometimes in their late 50s or 60 because they have wisdom and experience and knowledge that need to be passed on to the next generation. Epithalamin increases learning capacity. So to increase your learning capacity, make sure you go to bed early, and it slows down aging. Everyone over the age of 25 is interested in that one. Slows down aging. The last one is melatonin. And melatonin is called the fix and rejuvenate nighttime hormone. So melatonin, it releases in the night certain substances that are responsible for repair and rejuvenation. And our healing happens at twice the rate in these hours compared to other times. So how important it is to go to bed early to access those hormones. I read a book, in fact, I bought it in Sheffield about 3 years ago. It was called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. And reading that book opened my eyes about what happens when we sleep. And he quotes research from the 1950s, probably where it started, where they used to put electrodes on rats' brains and eyes. And they found that at certain times of the night, the rats' eyes were working very, very fast. And at certain times of the night, the rat's eyes were still. And they found that the movement of the eye corresponded with movement in the brain, and the stillness of the eye corresponded with stillness in the brain. And then they started to experiment on humans. And one of the researchers even to his little 2-year-old girl, and they discovered the same thing happened. So what they called the cycles rapid eye movement and non-rapid eye movement. So let me show you what happens in the non-rapid eye movement time. So in non-rapid eye movement, this is when the eyes are quite still. There's a courier service. So what's this courier service? So let's have a look at the brain. This is the brain from side on. Down here's the pineal gland, and the top part of the brain is called the cortex. So this is the hippocampus, and this is our short-term storage unit. So everything that happens through the day is stored in the hippocampus. And then when we sleep at night, there's a courier service that takes these memories up to the cortex. And the cortex is our long-term storage unit. So that's happening in the early part when non-rapid eye movement is most prominent. What also happens in non-rapid eye movement time is there a cleaning system. The cleaning system in the brain, it happens under the action of glial cells, and glial cells are more numerous in our brain than brain cells. In fact, they've given the cleaning name glymphatic system. So the glymphatic system is the cleaning system. And that happens in non-rapid eye movement time. They found that the brain cells seem to shrink up a little, allowing more fluid between the brain cells, allowing for the cleanup. So what has to be cleaned up? Waste from neuronal activity, waste from the combustion of glucose and oxygen in the energy cycles in the cell. They've even found that the glymphatic system can clean up residue or even thorn type buildups from negative emotions, which is interesting. What about rapid eye movement time? Rapid eye movement time, there's a lot more happening. Rapid eye movement time, there's a filing system happens. And the filing system refers to the fact that all our memories are filed in a certain order. Now, Matthew Walker is an atheist, and he says in his book, after explaining the filing system, he says it's almost as if sleep has an intelligence. Isn't that interesting that that comes out of the mouth of an atheist? And if I were to talk to Matthew Walker, I'd say, well, it does have an intelligence. It's called God. God put these systems in place. So remember, in non-rapid eye movement time, your short-term memories unit is emptied and the memories are taken up to the long-term storage unit, but they're not just thrown in any old how, they're filed in a certain order. And this is where dreaming helps. And what they found in the research is that dreaming helps the brain to know where to file everything. What also happens in rapid eye movement time is this is where our inventions take place. In rapid eye movement time, there's also a consolidation of the things that we learnt through the day. I hope that's right. There's a consolidation. So what I'd like to show you now is how this plays out in the night. Dr. Matthew Walker, after all the research he went through, he came to the conclusion that we must have 8 hours a night. We must have 8 hours for all of this to be completed. So I'm going to show you my favorite times. My favorite time is 9 to 5. So let's do the first hour and a half, because what they found in all the studies, that these alternated hour and a half each. So the first hour and a half is 9 to 10:30. So between 9 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., non-rapid eye movement takes up 80%. So most of our courier is happening in the early part of the night, and most of our cleaning is happening in the early part of the night. Rapid eye movement time between 9 p.m. and 10:30 only takes up 20%. So our next hour and a half is 10:30 to midnight. So 10:30 to midnight, rapid eye movement time is 60. Rapid eye movement is 40. So now we've got 12 to 1:30 a.m. So 12 to 1:30 a.m., it's approximately 50-50. So 1:30 to 3, 1:30 to 3. Now we've got 40% non-rapid eye movement time and 60 rapid eye movement time. And that brings us down to 3 till 5, 3 till 5 a.m. We've got 20% non-rapid eye movement and 80% rapid eye movement time. And what you'll find, I know myself, if I wake at 2 or maybe 3 or 4, I'll always remember my dreams. But if I wake at midnight or 10:30, I don't remember my dreams, because you're actually not dreaming then. You're dreaming very little. Your dreaming mostly happens in the latter part of the night. So can you see what happens if someone doesn't go to bed till midnight? And a lot of people don't go to bed till midnight. Why? What would keep them up till midnight? It's only one thing, it's technology, isn't it? It will either the phone or games or Facebook or movies or etc. Technology. And Margaret Thatcher boasted on needing 5 hours sleep a night. And I would endeavour to say that that 5 hours started at about 2 a.m. And she had Alzheimer's for the last 15, 20 years of her life. Because what they have found in all cases of Alzheimer's, there's a buildup of calcified deposits on the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where our reason, intellect, and judgment is. That's our front part of our brain. And when someone has Alzheimer's, how's their reason, intellect, and judgment? It's actually almost not there, because those calcified deposits, they're called amyloid plaques. They inhibit the function of the prefrontal cortex. But if we go to bed early every night and our cleaning system is stimulated, that is continually cleaning this, especially that prefrontal cortex, so the amyloid plaques they never have the opportunity to build up. So what can you do to help? What can we do to get back into this? Well, I'm going to give you the acronym New Start Nutrition. Your brain runs according to the nutrition that we put into it. And your brain needs the glucose from our fruits and vegetables. It needs the amino acids from the protein that we eat to make the neurotransmitters. It needs good fats to nourish the cells and to keep that myelin sheath that's around the arm running well. That's why I think God's got a sense of humor. The nut that looks like the brain is the walnuts, high in omega-3s. Exercise increases blood supply to the brain, and when blood supply to the brain is increased, oxygen to the brain is increased, and oxygen soothes the nerves. So oxygen is a plus in many ways. Dr. Neil Nedley, when he has a very depressed or even schizophrenic patients, he puts them on 7 hours of exercise a day. Whew. He says after 1 week, they're so improved they can go to a 1 hour a day maintenance dose or 15 minutes high intensity interval training. Water, our brain's a hydroelectric system. No hydro, no electricity. It's important to be well hydrated when you go to sleep at night. I don't drink a lot of water before I sleep because I don't want to be getting up, but I hydrate my body all through the day. And because I hydrate my body all through the day, I don't have to have large amounts of it in the evening. Sunshine. Our brain needs sunshine. And sunshine helps us sleep because the sunshine gives very clear messages of day into the eye. You might have remembered I said earlier, light and dark signals are fed through the optic nerve to a control center in the brain. And that control center is influenced to release these hormones at night. So sunshine in the day increases a release of those hormones, and sleeping in the dark. So your light and dark signals are very important. One of the problems with the technology is that it gives off a concentrated light, far different to the light above our head. And it gives the brain a message that it must be daytime. So that really upsets the body clock. Temperance. One of the stimulants that really plays havoc with this circadian rhythm. You've probably heard of the circadian rhythm, which is the rhythm that our brain and our whole body runs at. One of the biggest disruptors is caffeine. Caffeine can cut the release of these hormones in half for 6 hours. Whew. You find many coffee drinkers have trouble sleeping. And even when they've stopped the coffee, they can have trouble sleeping sometimes for the next couple of years. So temperance is vital, keeping away from caffeine, keeping away from all stimulants. Alcohol. Alcohol at night causes a 40% reduction in the output of these hormones. No wonder when people go to sleep in the night under the influence of alcohol, they feel pretty bad when they wake up because they haven't been able to get their dose of pineal gland secretions. Oxygen. We looked at the importance of exercise to increase the oxygen because we've got 1 trillion brain cell, and when each brain cell is receiving enough oxygen, it gives us 18 times more energy. And that's why the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, not just because of the increase of oxygen, but also because the muscles get weary from a workout, from labor, and then relax into sleep. Rest. Something to remember to make sure you sleep well is routine. Having 6 children, giving birth to 6 children, I quickly saw how comfortable children were in a routine. If I kept to a routine, we did the same things at the same time every day, I found that the children, they just seemed to work much, much better. Now, we used to have breakfast at 7:30 every day. Now, it doesn't mean it has to be on the dot. Sometimes it might be 3 minutes late or 5 minutes late, but we mostly had it at the same time every day. So at home, it fits well into my routine when I'm at home. I wake at 5, I walk at 6, and I eat at 7. And you can just about set a clock to when we eat. We eat at the same time every day, and we eat lunch at the same time every day. The body loves routine. So when I was traveling through Europe, there was one place where breakfast was 9 and the next meal was at 4. Whew. But I found, because intellectually I accepted that, my body did too. But I know at home, if I'm even 10 minutes after 7, my stomach starts protesting because it was expecting it at that time. So the body loves routine. And if you can keep to a routine of doing the same things at the same time every day, you will find that that helps you slip into a better sleep pattern. It also helps you to go into a better pattern with your colon. You'll find that it'll start going at the same time every day. The body loves routine. So I just like to cover, while we look at sleep or rest, what can inhibit sleep. And I think it was yesterday we talked about the chat room, that many people can't sleep because their brain goes into the chat room. Now I'm going to do this and I'll go over here and I'll plan this. I go into the chat room very, very quickly. So you've got to get out of the chat room, because you'll never sleep while you're in the chat room. So how you get out of the chat room, I think an old remedy is counting sheep jumping over a fence in your brain. My son James said he's found a way to get to sleep. He just says to himself, don't think, don't think, don't think, don't think, don't think, don't think, don't think. He reckons that gets him off to sleep. Another way to get out of the chat room is to picture someone in your life, a memory of an old auntie or a grandmother or a neighbour. I remember when I was a little girl, because there was my brother, then me, then 3 younger sisters. And Mum used to always call me the second little mother, because I was always the helper in the house. And the lady across the road, she had a 9-month-old baby and gave birth to twins. So can you imagine? She had 3 babies under one. And whenever she was needing help, she'd tie a nappy to the veranda. And if she tied a nappy to the veranda post, Mum would say, Barbara, quick, over you go. And I'd run over and help her with her babies. You see what I'm saying? Just memories. It was actually a warm memory for me that I was needed to help this mother with her little babies. So I'm sure we all have memories like that, warm memories, and it's a good time to go over them in your mind. Picture the person, picture what you loved about being there, and that will always relax you. Another thing you can do, and this is 1 Corinthians 5:18, in everything give thanks. So if you can't sleep, you lie there and say, thank you, Father in heaven, that I can't sleep because now I can talk to you. Thank you for my bed. Thank you that I'm not outside in a ditch and it's pouring rain. There's so much that we can be thankful for. There's a lovely old hymn. It says, count your blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. In other words, if you didn't count them, sometimes you'd miss them. So be very thankful for what you have. So when you get your brain into this type of thinking, it'll get you out of the chat room. You can always count backwards from 1,000. That'll really keep your mind on the job. I personally go over memory verses. So there's a couple of chapters I've memorized in the Bible. One's James chapter 1, that's 27 verses. And in the morning, I try and remember what verse I got to. And sometimes I get a third of the way through it, or sometimes I get half the way through it. But it's anything to get you out of the chat room. It's very important too to ensure that in your bedroom, there's no technology. It's important to ensure that you have a good mattress to sleep on, that you have a window, that you can have fresh air. Also, your pillow, make sure it's not moldy or dirty. We lose a lot of moisture in the night. And I know at our health retreat, every single pillow has a pillow protector, then the pillowcase. So that if we have a guest who's perspiring a lot, it doesn't usually get through to the pillow. We can wash the pillowcase and the pillow protectors. Pillow protectors are cheap. You can always buy just cheap pillowcases on special and have them as your pillow protectors. Because look where your face is and your nose, it's right on your pillow. So it's important that you're getting fresh air in the night. Also, natural fiber, cotton sheets, woolen blankets. And, you know, I notice in Ireland, there's a lot of sheep. We should be able to get nice woolen blankets. I do not like the synthetics. They almost have electricity when they move. So go for your natural fibers. So take steps to make sure your sleeping environment is comfortable. I always love having a hot shower before I go to bed. A hot shower relaxes the muscles. It gets any stickiness or perspiration off from the day. I always have a hot shower and go straight into bed. That can help a lot. What about herbs? Are there any herbs that can help? Valerian. Valerian is a herb that's a mild tranquilizer, mild sedative that can often help. Melatonin, some people take melatonin. You can get melatonin supplements. Some have found that help. Magnesium, some people say magnesium helps. And I have had ladies say to me that when they went on the Anna's Wild Yam Cream, when they balanced their hormones, they started to sleep better. So we always, with ourselves, do the process of elimination. Try this, try that, try that. And sometimes you might just have to be patient and give your brain and your body time to get back into the rhythm of sleeping. Trusting God is the final law of health. And I believe that this takes into consideration our mental, our spiritual, our emotional health, and trusting in God that He has our life in His hands. He created us. He has a plan for us. And I think that's quite exciting. Life with God is exciting because I know myself, my life changes sometimes day to day. And I just adjust. I just adjust because I trust that God knows best. I trust that He knows, well, of course He knows. He knows my future. He knows my past, and He knows the road that I'm to take. It reminds me of my little grandson, Lennox. So Lennox is 3, and we're walking next to the creek. And it's a little unstable, and he's having a bit of trouble walking. So I put my hand out and he grabs my hand. And the minute he grabs my hand, he becomes invincible. It's like he thinks he can do anything when he's holding onto my hand. He swings out over the creek, he jumps, he runs. I'm holding on thinking, I'm not as strong as his dad, but he has total trust in me. Total trust. I think what a beautiful illustration of God, what God wants us to be with Him. When we have our hand in the hand of God, we basically can be invincible because He is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. He just wants us to trust Him. Isaiah 26 verse 3, the Bible says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, he whose mind is stayed upon God, because he trusts in God." So remember the story of Lennox holding Nan's hand, instantly invincible, just because I'm holding his hand. And in Isaiah 42 starts at verse 5, it says, "Thus saith God, the Lord, the creator of the heavens that stretched them out, he that brought forth the earth and that which comes out of it, he that giveth breath to the people upon it and spirit to them that dwell therein." He says, "I, the Lord, hath called thee in righteousness. I will hold thine hand." There's your promise. He says, "I will hold thine hand. I will keep thee." So no matter where God asks you to go, grab onto that promise. He will hold your hand and He will keep you. Just like, and yet I'm just a failing human being, and I'm sure one day that hand might slip out of mine and he might crash into the creek. but he doesn't think that'll ever happen. And that's why Jesus said, unless you become like a little child, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Having that trust and that faith that that little 3-year-old boy, now that didn't happen like that. I was rocking Lennox to sleep. He's a little baby. I've got little videos of him running to me when he could hardly walk. Okay, so the trust starts early. So the more you have to do with God, the more you will be able to trust him. In Job 22, verse 21, it says, acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace. How do we acquaint ourselves with God? We read of him every day. Read the Bible every day and talk to him. We talk to him in prayer. That's how you establish a relationship. And that's how, with great confidence, you will allow him to hold your hand, because he said, I will hold your hand. I will keep thee. Beautiful promises. When the New Start program is adhered to in our lives, we will reap the benefit of health of body and health of mind. That's the good news. Are there any questions before we close?